Today on Practical Church Planting, we're talking about things to consider when looking for a space for your church to meet in.
Welcome everybody to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement. The big three to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brian Drosian. Joining me is Dylan Dodson. And today we're talking about things to consider when you're looking for a space.
Yeah, so we're answering a question that was submitted recently, and somebody asked us, my question is concerning going How do you guide people into finding a space for their church plant?
Right.
So we're just going to talk about some things to consider. Obviously, you know, if you're in church planting world, that a lot of your facility is not up to you.
Yes.
It's kind of like, where can I get in? But if you have some options, it's good to think through how the space might look.
Yeah, so we'll give like we won't give like hard and fast these things, but just kind of, because it's also all depends on context.
And so first thing we can talk about is the auditorium.
Yeah.
So depending on the size of the city you live in and all these sorts of things, if you're looking to rent a space, whether it's a community center or school, something like that, the size of your auditorium does matter.
Yes.
And here's the deal, like you can pipe and drape all day long. Let's say you're in our case, I mean, there's 500 or 600 seat school auditoriums that churches meet in our area because we live in Raleigh. And you can pipe and drape that all day long, but you just have to know that the feel of a large space with not a lot of people, like you can feel it.
Yeah.
Even if you make them sit next to each other. Now, again, we understand in church planning, you don't always have the choice of where you need to go.
Right.
But the size of the auditorium matters, and I would highly recommend going to a space that you think might be too small as opposed to too big. Mm-hmm. Too small means you can move to 2 services quicker, which is kind of a cool little energy boost to help people know this isn't just about us getting to know each other and that sort of thing. It also creates more energy. Like if you have 30 people in a room that can have max 50 chairs, that feels great. Right. If you have 30 people in a 200 seat room, that feels awful.
Not so great.
And so the size of the auditorium matters, the size of the stage matters. In our space, we're fortunate we have our own space 24/7. It is a tighter fit. If we put all the chairs out and configure them a certain way, we can actually put out like 85-ish. Mm-hmm. The way we do it, it maxes down about 75. But it was great, especially when we launched, because we would have 30, 40 people in there some weeks, and it didn't feel bad.
Yeah.
But if we had launched in a school, like it would have felt bad, and I think we would have had a harder time. We definitely would have had a harder time growing, because the field there wasn't exciting. It would have felt spread out.
Yeah, and this might seem kind of counter what you might be thinking of, I need to find the biggest place because our church is going to grow to be the biggest church ever, you know? And well, sure, we want to have room for people when they come, but, and this, you know, might not be what everyone wants to hear, but we also need to be a little bit realistic of, we might not have 500 people on launch day, you know, and be realistic of, if this isn't, you know, the 1% anomaly of a church, if we kind of do fit into the statistics of who generally comes, then are we making a mistake in trying to go much bigger than we need to and kind of, you know, killing the energy?
Yep. So that's something to consider, the size of your auditorium.
Yep.
Another thing to consider is just the location of the space overall. So where we launched, we wanted to be in a specific part of Raleigh, and fortunately, God blessed us to be on the main road of the area we wanted to be.
Right.
And these things matter. So finding a great space that's an offshoot of a road that people don't normally drive by, that maybe they have to use a GPS, and even using a GPS may be hard to see.
Right.
Maybe hard to see your signs. Like you might find a great space, and not saying that you should trade a great space because it was a bad location, but the location matters a lot.
Yes.
And one thing you need to consider too, I remember reading some research before we launched about, and I'm kind of butchering it here, but I'll give you the gist of what it said. Let's say someone is going to drive 15 minutes to your church. But let's say your church is located more towards the center of town where they already go. They are much more likely to drive there than 15 minutes outside of town where they never normally go.
Yeah.
And so you may find a great space. You may find a cheaper space that's outside of your area that the people you're reaching never really drive to. And I personally would try my best not to go there, even if it's cheap, because people will not drive to places they don't normally go to.
Yeah.
And so the location of your place matters. And we're not just saying, I mean, if you can get more on a main road where people, that's better. But at least being in the area of town where people go to is way better than cheaper and an amazing facility in an area of town that people never drive to.
Yeah. I don't think there's really a whole lot to add to that. I think we can't really expect, I mean, we wish we could, but we can't really expect people to drive to areas that they don't ever go.
Right.
Because even if someone hears about the church or sees it online or something like that, and they look at a map and kind of see I've never really been to this area, or this isn't an area I'm super familiar with, It's just, that's one more barrier that you don't really
And
need.
I know it's frustrating because it's like, it's 15 minutes. What does it matter? But it is a very psychological thing that research shows that people will not drive to church, or it's a lot harder for them They just don't want to drive to church if it's an area of town that they never ever go to.
Yep.
So the location matters. I know the facility matters, but also trying to be in an area of town that people drive to is important.
Yep, absolutely.
Another thing to consider is kid space.
Big one.
And this is hard too, again, especially if you're not meeting in a school. Maybe you're meeting in a community center or some, a bar or some place that people are, a non-traditional meeting place.
Sure, yeah.
Where there's not a bunch of rooms. You do need to consider what you're going to do with kids.
Yes, that's a big one.
Because kids are loud and they can be distracting. And it can be hard also for parents, if they can hear their kids, for them to focus on the service because they don't know what's going on with kids. Especially if they're parents that are more, if their kid cries, they have to go see what the problem is, that sort of thing. So considering where you're going to put your kid space and if there's room for kids makes a big deal as well.
Yeah, and another thing to consider is I don't know the right way to put this, but the safety aspect for kids.
Yep, absolutely.
That they can't have all these separate entry points to the kid space, And so it's all these little things to consider. And I think kid space is probably one of the more sensitive ones.
Yep.
Because you can't just say this is a great room, we'll throw kids in here, because you have to, the distance from it to the auditorium, to the nearest exit, to who has access to it, all these things that you need to consider. So yeah, I think that's definitely one you need to keep in mind.
So the safety of the kids area, is it just in this big open place that everyone can get to?
Right.
If there's an emergency, can the kids get away? And also the location close to the auditorium. And with that being said too, it's also important too, because some schools and things are structured to where you have your auditorium where everyone's meeting, and then the kid space is like a 5 or 10 minute walk.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of this stuff when you're planning a church is out of your control. We just want you to help you consider it. That is a kind of a turnoff too.
That is a deterrent.
Especially if it's in another building.
Yeah.
Not to say it can't happen. I know people that do it, and and it works great for them. But is there a space that's safe? That's not 10 minutes away, but also not in the auditorium or right next to it where they can hear it, because that determines if people with families come.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
Also, you can think about the parking lot.
Yep.
Is there enough parking for your place?
And easily accessible parking.
Easily accessible parking, because this is another big turning point, right? Not only is having enough space in your facility something you got to consider, but having enough parking, because if people can't park, well, they're less likely to come.
Yes. And another thing, and this, like you said, totally depends on where you are, and if you might not have control over it, but easily identifiable parking. Mm-hmm. In other words, not like you have a space and the place next to you allows you to use their parking, but it might be a separate driveway. Right. All these different things that it would technically work, but it make it more confusing.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, especially if you're in an area where there's not a lot of parking, and let's say another business is letting you use your parking lot. Well, when people are coming up, do they know that? Because it's nothing worse than well, am I supposed to park here or here? So it's good. Even if you're a smaller church, we've said this before, to always have people that serve in the parking lot, even if you don't need it, because it helps them feel welcome and lets them know where they go. But you need to consider, is there enough parking here? I know the thing can be it can be easy to say, well, this space is so great, we'll figure out the parking later. But it will just be a nightmare, and you probably won't figure out the parking later.
Parking is probably the hardest one to figure out later, because that is one you definitely don't have control over once you move in.
And the parking actually has a big say about whether or not your church can grow.
Yeah.
Because if people can't come, so you just want to make sure there's adequate parking and there's close enough parking.
Yes.
Because some schools and community centers and things too, how they have it set up is the parking is 15. It literally could be a 10-minute walk from some spots.
Yeah.
And again, here's the thing. It's easy for us to get frustrated because we're like, well, people in other countries, they'll walk 2 hours in the rain or shine.
Sure.
That is true. But in our context, that people just don't. And so our job as ministry leaders is to love people well and to encourage them. So you will have some people, but a lot of new people that don't know Jesus, they don't ever walk 10 minutes from a spot to, unless they're at Walmart and you're there because it's cheap. They don't do that. So they're not going to make that an exception for your church.
Yeah, if we're expecting people to come to church that don't come to church, or that have never come to your church, or that they didn't grow up in the church world, it needs to be as easy as possible. If every kind of roadblock or barrier or confusing point is just I feel like just one check down on if they're going to return or if they're actually going to stick around.
Yeah, so that's good. Another thing to consider too is that with the facility itself, the cleanliness and the presentability of it. Now, if you're portable, there's not a lot you can do. I mean, you can clean up the space before people get there. But the feel of the environment does play a part into the experience that people have.
Yeah.
And so is the place just way too big? Maybe not talking about the auditorium too big, but let's say the lobby's too big and it's so spread out and you're a new church of 30 to 40, 50 people. well, you want to consider the size of the space and also just the presentability of it. Like, is it just dirty? Is there things that is there pipe and drape, or is there things that you can put up to make it look better? I mean, you want to ask these questions, because again, I know we like to say, well, we're just going to sing and love Jesus. It shouldn't matter what the place looks like. That's true. But if we're trying to reach people that don't know Jesus, and we want to create an environment where your people that do know Jesus can invite their friends and be comfortable knowing that their friends would be like, oh, okay, this is good, as opposed to this is dirty, or it's confusing, or I don't know where to go, or how do I feel when I walk into the place? So again, you just want a place that is clean, accessible, because the vibe that your place gives off is kind of the vibe that people feel when they walk in.
Yeah.
So that's important. A couple more things real quick. You also want to take in consideration the bathrooms. Of course, you want to make sure they're clean on Sundays before you actually use them for everyone else. But are they accessible? Is there enough of them? How, can people find them easily? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
Make sure people have bathrooms.
Yeah, bathrooms are important.
And as a side note too, you want to make sure the space that you're in is kind of understandable, or if not, you got to make sure that you can print the proper signage so that people actually know where to go.
Yeah.
Philosophy that I like to use is that, yes, we want to make sure that people can be directed. If they have questions, someone can show them. But it's also, I think, a good rule of thumb to have enough directional and signage where people can find out where to go without having to ask somebody.
Right.
Not that you don't want them to ask, but for one, let's say somebody's not at the door like they're supposed to be. They're talking to somebody, so people are not lost. And number two, sometimes people don't want to talk to anybody. They just want to come in and leave, and we need to make that possible for people that are maybe nervous or trying it for the first time. So
yeah, people don't like asking stupid questions. A lot of times asking where something is, people can feel kind of dumb about it. Yeah. So it's better to make it easier for them.
So side note, for the space, make sure you can put signage and stuff with it. And then the last part.
Yes. I would say road presence.
Yes.
What you look like, or what your presence looks like from the road, whether that means you're actually on the road and you have a sign you can put up, or even if you're further back from the road.
Do people know you're there?
Do people know you're there? Can you, we're in a scenario, or our building, we're kind of set back a little bit from the road. We're kind of on the back of a building.
Yes.
However, we have the ability to put signage out and put flags out on the road on Sundays and on the weekends. So
you're not going to miss it. And we also have someone at our parking lot that's at the front to let people know.
Yeah. So if you find a great space, but it's kind of around the back of a building, and because of how the landlord works or because of how the building works, you're not allowed to put anything in the front, I think that's a huge deterrent.
Yes. You should definitely absolutely factor in, can people see it? If not, is there stuff that we can put out to make it very obvious that we are here?
Yeah. And another thing is, even if you think this place works, people know there's something around the back. If someone's going to pull in and there's no signage, there's nothing, it doesn't look like anything's going on because the cars are around the back of the building. It's intimidating to pull in because A, they don't know if they're on the right space. B, they don't know if they're the only ones there and would rather just turn around and leave. So making sure that something is visible from the road, I think is important.
Yeah. And all this to say, finding space is really hard.
Yes.
And it can be very discouraging. We have a long story of not being able to find a space, which turned into a good story because we found a really great space. But I would just say, don't compromise. Don't necessarily find the first thing that's available. If you're hesitant about something, then it's only going to be more of a headache down the road.
Yeah.
And so maybe you're saying, well, it's not the best location, but everyone on the launch team knows where it is. Well, that's great. But for future growth, well, people be able to find it. And all these things, if you're hesitant about something, again, you're not going to find a perfect space, most likely. But if you're really worried, oh, well, this will work fine, but once we grow, then it'll be a big deal. Just keep that in mind. You might have to move sooner, or just know that headaches now aren't just going to disappear later.
Yeah, another thing to keep in mind is don't sacrifice a ton for budget. You might come across something that seems to be a really good deal. However, you have to sacrifice a lot of things you don't want to sacrifice. Well, it seems great, and obviously we're all working on a tight budget. I think that down the road, you probably end up regretting it.
Yeah. So, hey, those are some things to consider when looking for a facility for your church plant. Thanks for submitting that question. And if you want to submit another question about ministry, church planting,
or anything,
practicalplanning.com/question, we'll answer it in a future episode. Until next time, we'll see you on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planning, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.